If you are using your garden for some or all of your daily food supply, it must be maintained to keep it producing food. Managing the garden will ensure fresh foods for your family. This means making sure that seedlings are in constant production to replace plants that are harvested. Every day, water is obtained, nutrient water is mixed, and the plants are watered. Plants need to be watched for any sign of a problem, and that problem needs to be corrected. Plants are harvested, and then seedlings are transplanted into the growers. This day-to-day routine, these chores, are necessary for daily production of food.
All my folks have gone before me, all my friends and all my kin, but I'll be with them a younger, will say so much.
At any time, for a 40 square yard garden, there should be at least 4 seedling growers producing seedlings for the garden. Seeds are started in the small seedling growers. The seeds are planted just as in soil, a depth of about twice their length. For seeds that are pointed, usually the pointed side is planted down. Seeds are planted usually once a week, enough for a week's supply of food or product. So if 40 lettuce are harvested a day, about 300 seeds should be planted once a week. Usually, about 10% extra is planted for those seeds that do not sprout or die before growing large enough to transplant. If your garden has lots of types of vegetables, some will not have to be replaced as often. An example is a tomato or a bell pepper. These plants can live for months, even years, still producing food, so they do not have to be replaced that often. Still, a few tomato and bell pepper plants, melon, cucumber, can be grown and used if needed. If they get too large, ready for transplanting, but not yet needed, it's wise to plant them anyway, ready for use. A tomato, bell pepper, melon usually take about 90 days or 3 months before they start producing.
And when the stars begin to shine, when the stars begin to shine, then long let it be in that number, when the stars begin to shine, open gate, closing door,
Plants like lettuce, onion, carrot, and turnip, plants that are harvested only once, need to be planted as they are harvested. So if you use 2 onions every day, then each week at least 16 onion seeds need to be planted. Some plants, such as carrot, cannot be transplanted, so they are seeded directly into the larger growers. The carrots are planted in a deeper grower and planted so there is space for full growth of each carrot, so seeds should be planted at least 1 inch apart. The carrots may take 120 days to reach maturity. A space of 2 square yards should grow 288 carrots, 144 full-grown and ready to harvest, and the rest growing for 120 days. So a 2 square yard garden space will provide a single carrot every day. If more carrots are needed, 2 square yards is required for each daily carrot required. The carrots are planted every 120 days. After the square yard is harvested, it is replanted, and the one planted 120 days ago is started harvesting. Other root vegetables, such as onion, can be grown in seedling boxes until about 3 inches tall, and then transplanted to a larger grower. Because they can be transplanted, 1 square yard of onion is all that is required to produce an onion a day. Onions are transplanted into a grower as they are harvested. Usually the transplant occurs 1 row at a time or once a week. Vegetables such as lettuce that grow rapidly can be replanted every week. If you wish to have a single head of lettuce every day, 7 plants need to be transplanted. There are some plants that behave differently in hydroponics than in soil. An example is tomato that produces 32 pounds of tomato per plant in hydroponics, but only about 7 pounds in soil. The 32 pounds of tomato is what is obtained in commercial hydroponics and greenhouses, but some of these techniques should help the home gardener also increase production. In managing your garden, it is recommended to keep a garden journal on the events. This journal will help maintain the garden by offering reminders of when to plant seeds, when to transplant, when to change nutrient water from grow to bloom or root. The journal also documents when any sprays were used to eliminate insects or disease, or when sprays such as garlic were used to prevent insects. The journal helps you manage the day-to-day operation of the garden. Your garden needs a commitment because it requires daily care 7 days a week. If you cannot commit about 2 hours a day in the morning, then you will need to find a partner who can help or some other arrangement that allows for 7-day care.
And when the stars begin to shine, then won't let it be in that number. When the stars begin to shine, open gate, closing home.
The daily routine begins by using up any remaining nutrient water mixed the day before. We try to mix fresh nutrient water once a day, but sometimes there is some remaining from the day before. This is used first, and the nutrient water is poured into the watering cans and used on the plants. Grow for the plants on grow, root for root vegetables, and bloom for plants that are blooming. Once the nutrient is used up, water is added to each of the water containers. The most economical water containers used are plastic garbage cans. These are rated by their content, and one labeled 100 liters or 25 gallons holds that much material. We use containers that are slightly larger than what we need, 120 liter or 29 gallon container to use for 25 gallons of water a day. The sizes of the container necessary is dictated by the size of the garden. A 40 square yard home garden of about 24 foot by 15 foot growing space should use about 40 gallons of water a day. If the garden is mixed, you will probably need about 14 to 16 gallons of each grow, root, and bloom a day. 3 20-gallon plastic containers should be adequate. If you have extremely hot weather and no shade cloth, this number may double, and 30 or 40-gallon containers are needed. After purchasing the containers, plastic containers with covers, they are set up for nutrient by first measuring in water, using a known container of a gallon or 4 liters, then counting until the daily water supply is reached, 14 or 28 gallons. Once this amount of water is in the container, a mark is made to identify the line of that number of gallons. This can be scratched into the plastic. After that, each morning the containers will be filled with water to that mark. This can be accomplished with a garden hose if you have piped water with water pressure. If not, water will have to be hand carried or obtained in some way. This can add an hour or more to your morning chores. After any remaining nutrient has been used in the garden and the water has been added to each container, it is time to add nutrient to the water. Whether you're using inorganic or organic nutrients, it's very important to follow the recipe for nutrient. If this is mixed improperly, the garden will suffer. With inorganic nutrient, the hydroponic nutrient you are using should come with a recipe. So much nutrient for so much water. This needs to be figured out for your water supply. For example, the ISH inorganic nutrients require 1/8 teaspoon per 1 gallon of water, or a single teaspoon for 8 gallons. 2 teaspoons are required for a 16-gallon water supply. For the 16 gallons, then calcium nitrate is added, 1/8 teaspoon per gallon, or 2 teaspoons of calcium nitrate for 16 gallons. The third nutrient of this recipe is magnesium sulfate, used at 1/16 teaspoon of magnesium sulfate per gallon of water. That means only 1 teaspoon of magnesium sulfate is used for that 16 gallons of water. So the daily routine for 16 gallons of water is 2 level teaspoons of grow, 2 level teaspoons of calcium nitrate, and 1 level teaspoon of magnesium sulfate. This is mixed in the grow nutrient container. Make sure the grow nutrient is marked on the container. For root nutrient, 2 teaspoons of root nutrient, 2 teaspoons of calcium nitrate, and 1 teaspoon of magnesium sulfate is needed in 16 gallons of water. For bloom nutrient, 2 teaspoons of bloom nutrient, 2 teaspoons of calcium nitrate, and 1 teaspoon of magnesium sulfate is used. Once the nutrients are mixed, they are ready to be used in the garden. A watering can is used for the nutrient to use on the plants. The nutrient water can be used directly on the plants for most plants. Beans can be sensitive to this and should be watered on the substrate only. For most other plants, nutrient water is good for the leaves. Each growing container should have a container below the drain hole to catch any excess nutrient water used the day before. Any nutrient left over is used on that grower first. As you get to know your garden, you will probably not overwater, and no excess nutrient water will go out the drain holes. Most plants will require about a gallon of nutrient water per square yard. Seedlings or small plants may need less, and older plants may need more. Your journal should keep track of which growing beds are using grow nutrient. You can also use a sign on the grower or a color. Grow should be used on the grow beds, bloom on the bloom beds, and root on the root beds. Almost all young plants and seedlings are started on the grow nutrient until their leaves are completely formed. Then some growers are switched. Any vegetables that are grown for their leaves, such as lettuce, cabbage, and green leaf herbs, are kept on grow nutrient. But vegetables that are being grown for their roots should be switched to root nutrient as soon as their leaves mature. If they're not switched to root, plants such as radish continue to grow lush leaves but produce very small roots. Any plants that bloom should be switched to bloom nutrient at the first sign of blossoms. If they're not switched, they will produce less flowers and less fruit. In the world of hydroponics, there are many inorganic nutrient formulas. Whichever one is used in the garden, it has to be mixed according to the recipe.
Lord, I want to be that number with a thick golden arch.
If your garden is using an organic nutrient, the same procedure is followed, but most organic nutrients require only 1 bottle of mix rather than all 3. Typically, it takes more nutrient for organic than inorganic. Instead of 1 teaspoon of nutrient, it may require a cup of organic nutrient for the 16 gallons. When worm castings is used, it typically requires 3 or 4 cups of worm castings for the 16 gallons of water. Usually worm castings are only 2% nitrogen, low nitrogen like a bloom nutrient. The worm casting hydroponic nutrient can be used for all the growers, but the lettuce and the leaf vegetables may grow a lot slower. It is hard to make good estimates, but hydroponic lettuce on grow nutrient in floating beds can grow about 120 pounds of lettuce a year in every square yard. In organoponics in Cuba, about 45 pounds of lettuce is produced in the same space each year, less than half. So if you use worm castings, you will need more growing space to produce as much lettuce per day. Organic nutrient or worm castings can produce as much tomato as inorganic nutrients. The worm castings can also produce as much root vegetables as inorganic root nutrient. Worm castings or organic nutrient have some advantages over inorganic nutrients. The organic garden is more resilient to problems. If the garden is not watered for a day, organic plants should last longer than the inorganic. Also, if organic nutrient is not mixed properly, it should not damage the plants as much as improperly mixed inorganic nutrients. For both inorganic and organic nutrients, plants that bloom, like tomatoes, should be switched from a grow to a bloom at the first sight of blooming. This should keep the tomato blooming and producing food. Once a week, the plants are watered without any nutrients at all. This allows the beds to be flushed of some excess nutrients. Floating bed growers do not need to be watered every day, but each bed needs to be aerated. This means the water is mixed by hand for at least 1 minute. This adds oxygen to the water from the air, and this is necessary for the plant roots. Plants in floating beds should have white, full roots. If the roots are dark or rotting, the water is not being mixed well enough. Sometimes, in hot climates, the lettuce may have to be aerated a second time each day. When a floating bed grower is first started, water is added to the grower by first mixing it in the grow container. The grow mix is made as normal: 2 teaspoons of grow, 2 teaspoons of calcium nitrate, and 1 teaspoon of magnesium sulfate per 16 gallons of water. After the nutrient is mixed, it is poured into the floating beds. More nutrient is mixed until the depth of water reaches 4 inches. Then the styrofoam floats are placed on the water, and the seedlings are placed in the foam and put in the grower. The 4 inches of water should be enough to last until the lettuce is fully grown. If the lettuce starts to show signs of nutrient deficiency, more grow nutrient can be mixed and added to the water bed. Some garden owners add a bit of nutrient water every day. After watering the plants, it is time to check for insects or use a garlic spray to prevent insects. Any insect or disease should be handled immediately. Soap spray can be used. Plants can be pulled or pruned. Insect eggs can be removed from leaves and substrates. Once a week, yellow sheets are coated with a fresh coat of motor oil. Other insect traps are checked and renewed if necessary. After the watering and insect checking, then seeds are planted, transplants are moved. After the chores are done, vegetables are harvested to prepare for daily family foods. If foods or products are being grown for income, these are usually picked early in the morning on market day. Keeping a journal, taking care of your garden, should lead to a garden that produces food and income. Caring for your garden every day should yield results that can give you food security and a better life. Many plants do better in the garden and produce more food if they are pruned. A good example of this is tomato production in commercial hydroponics. The tomatoes grown are called indeterminate or staking tomatoes. They will grow as a long vine, as long as 25 feet in commercial hydroponics. A common choice for a commercial grower is a beefsteak tomato, and a common variety is called trust. Each week the lower leaves are removed as the tomatoes ripen, and just the stem remains. Each week that remaining stem is laid down on the ground, and all the tomatoes' tops move down about a foot. Each tomato is trained to be a single stem by removing suckers or side shoots that form at the inside of each side shoot. Remove these by hand when they reach 1 or 2 inches.
All my folks have gone before me, all my friends and all my kin.
Tomatoes begin life as yellow flowers, a bunch on a stem. These yellow flowers need to be pollinated. Each flower has a small amount of powdery pollen, and each flower needs to receive pollen from another flower to be successfully pollinated and then become fruit. In an outside garden, natural breezes and wind will pollinate the tomatoes, shaking the flowers to pollinate each other. Indoor greenhouses without the wind used to have workers shake each plant to get it to pollinate. Later, a special vibrator was invented to place against each tomato stem to shake the flowers. In modern greenhouses, bumblebees are used to pollinate the tomatoes. In small systems, each tomato can be tapped on the stem a few times to ensure pollination. After pollination, when the fruits start to form, you may wish to remove some green tomatoes to make the remaining ones grow larger.
Oh, when the saints go marching in, we will be in line for that judgment.
First, we use in hydroponics cucumbers that climb, such as the varieties of European or Long English. These are encouraged to vine with each lateral or side branch trimmed off after 2 leaves. European cucumbers are seedless and do not need pollination. Only allow about 3 fruit to form at any one time to produce good food. If you are raising flowers in your garden, old faded flowers can be removed to encourage new flowers. This is called deadheading and works for most of the flowers we use to sell. We also prune flowers, usually at the end of their season. We cut back older branches or dead branches, leaving stems to begin the next season. Some of the vegetables, such as beans, need to be staked or put on strings to provide support. Some of the vegetable flowers, such as squash, need to be pollinated by hand. Take pollen from a male flower without a bulb to a female flower with a bulb behind it. A paintbrush works well for this. Corn also needs its top tassel shook to pollinate the silks of the corn below. In your garden, some plants will need to be pruned, others pollinated. This is a daily chore and leads to successful food production. A well-managed garden, cared for every day, can provide you with outstanding food from this day forward.